I would say, since we met all the second time for this AMA, I would start with a small introduction of every one of you. So, Martin, could you please start?
Sure. Hey, hi, I'm Martin. I'm with Q Development AG. Have been with the Q protocol more or less from the very beginning. Nowadays, spending time on writing the concept, developing the concept further, and ecosystem development.
Thank you. I would say, Nicolas, you would be the next one, and then Tobias.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Nicolas. Just like Martin, I've been with the Q protocol from the very beginning, spending most of my time today on ecosystem development and the Q constitution and all of those elements related to that.
Thank you. Toby? Toby? Toby, do you hear me? Oh, there is he gone. So, I would say, still Toby joins again. Sounds like he has a disconnect, but Nicolas and Martin, you hear me, right?
I can hear you very well.
Ah, that's great. Yeah. So I would say, oh, there he is. So.
Yeah, do you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, sorry for the trouble. I heard you all the time, but apparently you didn't hear me. Yeah, so yeah, I'm Tobias and I'm a computer scientist involved with Q also from the very beginning, from the early concepts and yeah, all the smart contract and Q client development ever since. So I'm the tech guy in this round.
Thanks, Toby. So Athos is just around the corner. The voting ends on Friday next week. And we're meeting today to answer a few questions. So I would start right away with the first one. This one is for you, Toby. Why is the Athos hard fork happening and what are its main objectives?
Yeah, that's of course always when you do a hard fork, you need good reasons for it. And yeah, the main purpose is to improve operational security, both for validators and for root nodes. And yeah, there are also some minor improvements, but that still are important to improve overall robustness.
Thank you. So you mentioned operational security and robustness. So what are the potential benefits for users of the Q blockchain? And how will the Athos hard fork improve this?
Well, the most important thing is the operational security we improve via account aliases. And yeah, it's basically it is very common practice in other protocols as well to separate some functionalities of a logical entity, and notably here to separate keeping the money safe from providing or signing protocol messages. Let's put it like this. Yeah, and for the overall robustness, we have things, for example, like increasing the bytecode limit, which is a very technical thing, but yeah, there used to be a 24 kilobyte limit for smart contracts. And with some of our system contracts, we were very close to this limit already. And this would have meant if we need to fix anything on those contracts, and we would go beyond those 24 kilobyte, then this would require a large refactoring of the entire thing, which adds more risk to the overall evolvement of the system contracts. So why we don't intend to come anywhere near the 48 kilobyte we have now, this still leaves us room for quick improvements and without huge refactorings being necessary.
Thank you, Toby. So you mentioned already account aliases. So can you go a little bit more in detail about this feature? How does it work in practice, as example?
Yeah, let's see what we had initially when we launched back in March. You had your, let's say, the validator account in the ranking. And if you're in the top ranking, then you become active validator. You have the right and the duty to produce blocks with this address. Yeah, and that means the address that controls large amounts of funds is also required to configure in the Q client for assigning blocks. And that's usually, if you're serious with some amount on it, a far from ideal setup, because you have 24/7 exposure with the keys you have in the Q client, and furthermore, you have usually at least in companies, you have other people with access to the IT infrastructure where you run your Q client, other people then who should have access to the funds. So with account aliases, you do like this. Everything on-chain remains as we had it before. Yeah, we call this now main account. Yeah, the account that holds the money, the account that controls the delegator share and does voting and so on, whatsoever. This is the main account and everything remains unchanged. But you can now decide to set up an alias account for the very purpose of block sealing. That means in the Q client, you do not configure and unlock your main account, but instead you can configure and unlock your alias account. And by the consensus, by the new consensus after the hard fork, the other clients will accept blocks signed from the alias instead of signed from the main account. So you achieve the separation of the funds from the operational tasks in the Q client. And similar holds for root nodes. There it's not about block signing, but signing layer 0 governance lists like root node list and validator exclusion list, and co-signing the transition blocks. All this can be done with the alias account instead of the main account.
Thank you. So it's a big feature who's coming to Q. Tobias and Martin, can you both explain the Q improvement proposal in short QIP process and how it is used to propose and vote on changes to the Q blockchain?
Yeah, sure. I'll start, and Tobias, feel free to jump in or to add to what I'm saying. So first of all, anyone who's involved in the Q protocol who holds Q tokens can submit a proposal for a change. So in this case, it's been Tobias, who's the main person who's initiated this proposal, who's worked on the change, but obviously I think it's fair to say, Tobias, that a number of people have been involved in this, and you can look at the GitLab to get a sense of who were the contributors to this proposal. But as I said, anyone with a Q token can submit a proposal. There is no minimum threshold to do that. Now, there is no specified format for a proposal change, but as it is customary in other protocols, in Bitcoin you have the BIPs, Ethereum the EIPs, and so on. So we have QIPs, but this is, I think, more good practice to have a proper documentation and very much detail, both in terms of description as well as, of course, the code, which is the main part, to have that structured in QIPs. And in this case, it's actually a number of QIPs that make up the proposal that go into the Athos hard fork. So the voting is on all of those QIPs together. But I think the account alias is the main one, and there are some other ones which are more housekeeping, I would say. Now, once a proposal is submitted, it's submitted on chain, and then you can very easily via the Q HQ. So you go on hq.q.org, and this is where you can see all proposals that are submitted. And now this one is actually the first, not only the first hard fork, but the first change proposal to the Q protocol that's been submitted. There are different categories as well, so for voting in root nodes, for example, but this is an actual change of the protocol itself. Now, there are different levels of severity of changes, if you want to call it that, which are all described in the Q constitution. So I think this is something that's particular to Q, which maybe is a bit different, but doesn't exist in that sense in other protocols. So you have clearly specified what type of thresholds, both in terms of voter participation, so quorums, as well in terms of majority requirements are needed for which types of changes. So the more severe a change, the higher majority and quorum requirements are specified in the Q constitution. But once the proposal is out, then everyone can vote on it. Everyone who holds Q tokens, you need to lock up your tokens for 21 days to do so, and then you're free to vote, either with yes if you support the proposal, or obviously with no if you don't. If the vote is positive, there is another security check, which is done by the root nodes, which is full nodes that are tasked with monitoring the Q constitution and ensuring that whatever happens in terms of changes to the protocol is in line with the constitution. So in case of a positive token holder vote, they will check whether the proposal is in line with the constitution. And if they don't think that's the case, they can veto it. If they don't, then basically that's it. After 14 days have passed, if no veto by the root nodes has been submitted, then the change can be implemented. So it's a number of security steps in between. Most importantly, the veto option by the root nodes. But if there is a positive vote and no veto by the root nodes, then the proposal can be implemented.
I don't know if I have much to add about it. Yeah, that's the process outlined is like this. It is inspired, as you mentioned, Martin, by Bitcoin improvement proposal and Ethereum improvement proposal, and it is still only what we came up with so far. So we expect and hope that on a meta level, also the Q improvement proposal process will in itself see community contributions. Yeah, at the moment, for example, we only have the status draft and we have the status final. And I imagine in more mature stage, we would have multiple stages in between, where we say, okay, maybe at someday we see a technical expert panel that can give an opinion on a draft proposal, and then it is, let's say, pre-approved or whatever. So yeah, feel also free to read about it. There is some description in the QIP repository, which is public, and let's work on this all together as community.
You want to say something, Martin? You unmuted yourself.
Sorry, no, I think yeah, that's a very important point that Tobias mentioned. That of course, community involvement is very much desired. So feel free also to contribute and to comment. But I don't really have anything else to add.
Okay, thank you. Only Nicolas, you have something to add for this, or?
No.
Okay. So, but you can stay unmuted. The next question is for you. So, can you explain the process for voting on network upgrades and the role of root nodes in this process?
Yeah, sure. So, I think I would be adding to what Martin said, because he very nicely laid out the overall concept, and what I maybe could do is just dig a little deeper into the way we do this, which is very different from most other protocols, where we do have the constitution as the basis, the very transparent and very explicit contract between all participants of the queue system, all of the token holders, that lay out how any kind of proposal or advancement of the system is being dealt with. And you can find the constitution on the website, and if you go through the constitution, you will find a Annex 5 that lays out voting, and it explains how voting on certain topics, different kinds of topics, is being done and expected to be done. And if you then think about, and then there are very explicit requirements for who can be participating in the voting. What are quorum requirements? A quorum is the number or percentage of the community that needs to participate for a vote to be legitimate. And then majority requirements, which is the question of how many of those participating need to agree on yes or no of a decision, for the decision to become valid and go through. So if we look for this proposal at hand into the Constitution, we find that it is a fundamental change in the sense of the Constitution. So again, everything that we are dealing with is laid out in the Constitution. So if you go through Article 1 to 3, 4, you will find all kinds of things. And then in the definitions section in Appendix 1, you will find a letter N, like Nicholas, which is a coincidence. And the letter N talks about fundamental changes. And it says everything that's either stated or used or provided in Articles 1 through 3, if you change anything with respect to those elements, that would be a fundamental change. And because the feature of aliases has an impact on the definition of what a validator is, namely saying that you can split into a main account and an alias account. it has an impact on validator definitions and root node definitions, which are covered in the first articles 1 to 3, which makes it a fundamental change. And then 4 fundamental changes you will find in Appendix 5, a table telling you exactly what are the who are the eligible proposers, anyone, any Q token holder, as Martin laid out. It says who are the eligible voters who can vote, Q token holders, so all Q token holders can vote. The voting period, 672 hours, and then a quorum requirement, so 50% of all token holders need to participate, and out of those 50%, there needs to be a majority of 75% in order for this proposal to be accepted. And if you would now go into the dashboard, the HQ dashboard, which you will find under q.org, click on the home page onto Enter Q. You will find the dashboard, and there you will find the Q proposal, and you will find that it says exactly that it says the quorum requirement is 50%, and the majority requirement is 75%, and then you see what the current quorum is, which is 4.07%, so we are still waiting for a lot of token holders to cast their vote. And this is how overall this idea of having explicit rules in order to advance the system and deal with voting on network upgrades is being dealt with. The role of the root nodes is the following. Whenever you have a set of rules providing for what should be, you have to have an execution mechanism that ensures that what should be really will be. And that is the job of the root nodes. So the root nodes, they kind of have the constitution in their hands, or they look at the constitution, they monitor the system, and in this instance, they look whether the voting proposal is in line with the constitution, which means, has the proposal incorporated the relevant quorum and majority requirements? Can anyone who should be able to vote, can they vote? And so forth. These elements. Why is that important? So think of a situation where you have like a really fundamental change like the one we're looking at right now, and you want to kind of mess with the system a little bit. What would you do? You might want to think about kind of disguising it as a little small change. And you would say like, well, this is just something small. This is not a fundamental change. I propose to have a much smaller quorum and majority requirement, and thereby be able to sneak in something that is very important and fundamental as something little and not so relevant. That is the job of the root nodes, to really understand, is the kind of change that is proposed, is it relevant? How relevant is it? How does it sit in the categories laid out in the Constitution? And are the proper requirements really observed? Which here is the case. I mean, you can see it, and root nodes will do exactly that in what is called the veto period. So after the voting has ended on December 23 at 9:41 a.m., then the root nodes will have until January 6, 9:41 a.m. to look at how the voting had been done, whether everybody who should have been able to vote actually was able to vote, whether the quorum requirements were the correct ones and whether they have been met, and whether the majority requirements at 75%, whether they were applied and whether they had been met. If that were the case, then they would not cast an objection, and then the vote would be positive and go through. That's the role of the root notes and the role of the Constitution, laying out in very great detail how you can amend the system in a very structured way.
Thank you, Nicolas. So in a bigger picture, the root notes are the knights of the Constitution. It's beautiful thought. I
like to call them. I like to call them the guardians of the Constitution.
Guardians is even better. So the Constitution is such an important feature of Q or part of Q, but how actually can token holders see the proposed changes to the Constitution, because they have to? Can you explain this, Nicolas, please?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the proper way to do this is, of course, take the current version of the Q Constitution, which can be found on, again, the EuroHQ DApp. On the dashboard, you will find the Constitution. You can download it, and that is a set of rules that is applicable right now. And then you would take the proposed new set of rules, which is the Constitution, including the changes thereto, and you would essentially just look at one and then at the other and try to understand what are the differences. You would compare one with the other. And this I would, of course, advise everyone who is interested to do, like do your own due diligence. What we will offer and have done in preparation of this to make it a little easier to understand maybe is, first of all, we will post a link to a video that makes this process understandable of how you can do it, also in a more technical fashion, and understand what the changes are. And you can use that to then get some guidance of what you should be looking at and what the changes really are. Again, although I know for somebody who would rather read code than text, I understand it is a little bit of a new experience maybe, and thereby a little more burdensome. I would still really like to encourage everyone to try it once. The Q Constitution is relevant, and it's a great thing to familiarize yourself a little bit with it.
Thank you, Nicolas. So, Athos is right in front of the door, and I would like to ask you, Martin, how does the upgrade process on Q differ from other protocols?
Yeah, sure. So if you look at other layer ones, Bitcoin, Ethereum being the, of course, most well-known examples, but many other ones are similar in that regard. They essentially rely on social consensus for code changes or protocol upgrades. Or hard fork specifically. So you have kind of a more or less messy process, I would say, where someone suggests a change, and then somehow the community, discusses and has to come to a conclusion whether that change is wanted or not. And as soon as there is, the feeling within the community that this is the case, then there is a date is agreed within the community at which the hard fork is implemented or the change is implemented. And then just everyone upgrades the node or doesn't, and if they don't, that means there is another fork, and there are two versions of the protocol. That works well sometimes. Sometimes it can be very messy, as we've witnessed with some protocols where there's been a lot of infighting within the community. But essentially for many layer ones, there isn't really a structured process of how those changes are implemented. There are, of course, also protocols where there is token voting on protocol changes on hard forks or forks of any type, but still most don't have explicit rules that define what the process is. So it's still implicit mostly in the code on how that voting takes place. Which also leads often to a situation where you can have forks and different versions of the network post-fork, essentially. Now, with Q, the big difference is, first of all, it's not only that token holders can vote, but also that there is a clear definition of how that vote takes place and what type of majority requirements are needed for different types of changes. But also that there is a mechanism that it is actually controlled within the protocol, that everything is going according to the rules. The root nodes we've been already talking about, and their veto power and their independence of, for example, the validator set, who is essentially then the stakeholder set which needs to implement the fork. But also there is an arbitration option. So in case of disputes, you don't have to agree with the root nodes. If anyone, whether it's a validator or just a token holder, thinks that the root nodes have gotten it wrong, then you can challenge their vote or their veto, and essentially go in front of arbitration, and then there will be an arbitration process that decides who's right and who's wrong, and the basis for that is, again, the Q constitution. All of that leads to a situation where the network is non-forking, so you always know which one is the quote-unquote proper or correct version of the Q network, and thereby adds security and predictability to protocol changes.
Thank you, Martin. So let's get back to an important topic called trust and security, or trust, let's say it. So, Tobias, when there is a proposal, how do you take care that this proposal is not modified after I voted for or against it?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's really important, and actually, we thought about it a lot, because initially the idea was to use any public forum like a Reddit. You can draft your proposal and vote on it, but there we realized that exactly there we have the problem. You vote on something that is cannot be considered immutable. And our approach to this is to make use of Git and the commit hashes that Git system uses. And that's quite technical, but you can imagine like it's almost like a blockchain. Yeah, it's you start with a file, an empty file, and you get an initial commit hash, and you do changes on this file, and with every set of changes you commit, you get a new hash, which builds on the previous hash. And so it is practically not possible to produce a different file with the same commit hash. And we include this precise commit hash in the off-chain link we have in the proposal. So there we are pointing to an immutable version of our proposal, And the GitLab terminology for this is a permalink. Yeah, so it's pointing to a revision of the document that cannot be changed anymore. And of course, there are other revision-proof document systems. And this is one which has fulfills the requirement there that it is revision-proof, and on top, it is very well suited for collaboration in the community, as opposed to maybe some proprietary tools that allow for revision-proof documents. Only as a side, so as a rule of thumb, on testnet, it's not like this, because usually we do the proposals on testnet before the proposal is final. So there, at least with my proposals, I decided to point to the master version, so the most recent version of a proposal. But on mainnet, I recommend to never vote on a proposal that does not include such kind of permalink or revision-proof document, because otherwise that's exactly the problem. You're voting on something that can be changed afterwards, and that's exactly not what you want.
Thank you, Toby. So, hard fork stands right in front of our door. Do I need to set up an alias before the hard fork activates, or do I have to make it later?
That for me, or I can jump in anyway.
You can jump in. Feel free.
No, it's entirely optional, and depending on your let's say risk aversion, or also on the amount you have at stake, it's your decision to do it or not. I suppose most private personal node operators can go without an alias. I did not ultimately decide yet, but I think I will go without alias, because I operate the node myself. I'm the only one with access to the machine, so I feel secure enough without an alias and without the separation. But maybe at some point I change my mind, but it's definitely not mandatory and nothing you have to do before the hard fork activates. You can do it whenever you feel ready, and ready means you have a Q client with the alias account up and running, ideally already synchronized with the network, and then as a final step, you set up the alias on-chain, and then you can produce blocks or as a root node, co-sign transition blocks and so on with your alias instead of your main account.
Can I check before the Athos activation whether I did the upgrade properly, or is there a way to check it in general?
It's something we are working on, because from all your feedback from the community, we realized that when you're coming from a very old setup, it is not sufficient to just replace the Docker image. You really have to take care that you use most recent Docker Compose file, or at least not a very old Docker Compose file. We're trying to come up with a script or some instructions how you can be absolutely sure you did it right. For now, I can only say if you see in your Docker Compose file something like the --network ID as a get parameter, this is something we used in the early days, but we must not have in the most recent config. Or if you see something like Genesis JSON in your Docker Compose file, and where we map the Genesis block as JSON file into the Docker container. This is something we did in the beginning, and if you still have this is wrong. Then the Athos will not activate on your client. So this is something you can check, and please stay tuned for more precise documentation on how you can prevent this misconfiguration.
Thank you. It's a great word. So, Martin, how can you learn more about the Athos hard fork and participate in the process?
So participation, obviously vote. If you hold Q tokens, then you can vote on it, familiarize yourself with it, make up your mind whether you like it or not, and then vote yes or no. To learn about it, I think the first place to go is to the proposal itself. So if you go to hq.q.org, so where you have all the front-end functionalities, there is a section governance and then Q proposals, and every proposal comes with an external reference that takes you right to the GitLab, where you can look at the different QIPs that make up this proposal, and go as deep as you want, check out the code, read the descriptions, and so on. Other than that, I think this Discord where we are right now is a good place, specifically if you have any questions. I think if you do have questions, or if you want a description or want to talk to someone also from the development team that's been developing this this upgrade, then just ask in the Discord, and I think from my experience you'll get an answer very quickly. I think there's also a blog post coming up which describes the changes on a non-technical, somewhat higher level. So watch out for that. But as I said, the proposal itself plus questions here in the Discord is the best place.
Okay. Often asked question is from the community actually. When opens the mainnet? Can you say something to this, please?
Yeah, sure. So mainnet is open. So mainnet has launched in March. I think maybe within the community there's been a bit of a question or confusion because recently we've also done or announced and already are in the process of providing some incentives for validators to validate on the testnet. That doesn't mean the mainnet is limited in any way, quite the opposite. So the goal of the testnet incentives in the validator onboarding program is really twofold. So first of all, we do want validators to work on the testnet, provide feedback, make sure that it's useful, that there are a sufficient number of validators that is active on it, so that we can use it for what it's supposed to be used for, namely testing. But also it's a good entry point if you want to become a validator on the Q mainnet. So just participate in the Q testnet incentive. You'll get mainnet tokens as a reward, and then you can start validating on the mainnet.
Great. I think that was a great answer. So we came to the end. I would say thanks to all of you for the excellent replies. Always a pleasure to hear how intensive the development of Q is going on. Before we get to the end, I would like to point out that the currently running mainnet proposal is open for voting until next week, Friday. That will be the December 23rd. Please check your HQ after the call. Tobias, Martin, Nicolas, would you like to say goodbye?
Sure,
Well,
thanks
great, everyone.
everybody.
Thanks for listening in. Much appreciated.
So I would say thanks for coming. We wish you a happy holiday season. 2023 is right in front of our door. So have a nice day. See you soon.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.